Hi, everybody. I'm here this afternoon with Dr. Scott Winterstein from the Department of Fisheries and Wildlife. Dr. Winterstein is a professor in fisheries and wildlife, and I'll let him give a little bit of background as to who he is, and then we'll ask him some questions about his research and teaching.
Hi, as Dr. Urquhart said, my name is Scott Winterstein. I'm a professor in the Department of Fisheries and Wildlife. I guess you'd classify me as a quantitative wildlife ecologist. I started working at MSU back in 1986. So I've been here a few years. I work on a whole variety of different topics, which I guess we'll get to here in a second. So what do you want to ask me, Jerry?
So let's start off with what you teach, and then we'll talk about what you do as far as research.
Okay, for the FW folks, your junior or senior year, you'll be taking a class called Population Analysis and Management that I teach. And it is what the title says. We learn how to look at the data we collect on wildlife populations, mostly demographic stuff. How many are there, survival rates, sex ratios, and so forth. And then what do we do with it? And the class you won't take if you're an FW major is I also teach over in the Integrated Studies in Biology program and teach one of their ISB 202 classes.
Great. So tell us a little bit about some of the research directions you do as far as quantitative wildlife ecology.
Well, I guess mostly what you say my research is on how do we count things. So for example, how do you figure out how many moose there are in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan? How many ducks overwinter out in Lake St. Clair? Not anything on a particular species, but questions of demographics. How many, what do they do, those kinds of things. How do you count stuff?
Great. Well, that's leads to kind of an interesting next question, which is where you started with this, because we don't necessarily always start off with wanting to count things. I want to go see a really cool animal, or I want to go catch a really cool fish. How did you get from, where did you start, and how did you get to being the person that does quantitative ecology?
So I've always been interested in critters. I grew up way out in the country in upstate New York. I was always that kid that was out playing in the mud and coming home with stuff and scaring my mother, that kind of thing. But when it came time to go to college, all my degrees on the biology side are in biology or zoology. I don't really have a degree in fisheries and wildlife. When I started working on a degree in statistics, one of my jobs was to work with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service at their research laboratory up near Washington, D.C. And those problems I got assigned to work on had to do with wildlife and fisheries management. And it was like, wow, this is really, really interesting stuff. I'm kind of a numbers nerd, and I can mix the statistical part of it and the biology into, well, okay, they may be questions that not a lot of people are interested in, like, so how do you count moose? Here's a hint, you do it with an airplane. And so I really got into fisheries and wildlife through the statistical quantitative end. And then I started interacting with people like you and Dr. Hayes and learning more natural history kinds of things. And let's face it, it's really neat stuff to do.
Yeah. Yeah, it's it's interesting. My last interview was with Dan Hayes, and he and I are very naturalist focused, and that was our starting point. And but not everybody has the same starting point. And I do really like to stress that, because just because a student may have grown up in a suburban area and not had all the experiences with wildlife, it's the passion that really is what will drive things and make them successful.
Yeah, if we got a quick second, you're right. The pathways are really different. My first job that I count as a job in any kind of ecology type field, I climbed trees. I worked for a doctoral student. I was an undergraduate. She was working on nesting in pinion jays. And they needed somebody foolish enough to climb 80-foot ponderosa pine trees. And that was my first real job as an ecologist, right? I mean, and then from there, the pathway gets pretty windy and twisted to end up
Yeah.
here at Michigan State.
Well, and that's what I like to point out, especially to my students thinking about graduate school and such, is that there are no straight paths toward the career that you want, that it will twist and turn and you end up doing something very different. I wanted to be that person that was climbing trees studying pinyon jays. I was very interested in birds and wanted to be an ornithologist, and instead ended up studying tropical mammals. And so, yeah, it changes along the way. So before we get to the question, the last question that will come back to that, what do you think are some of the real important issues right now as we think about fisheries and wildlife conservation in the 21st century?
Well, I'm sure this one has come up before, but climate change is just huge. I mean, you can look at me, right? I've lost my hair, my beard is gray. I'm not going to be around in this world long enough to have to worry too much about it, although things are changing now. But the folks who are taking the 101 class, this is going to be a real issue in their lives.
Yeah.
And then, I'll admit, I want my great grandchildren, should they ever show up, to have a livable world. So climate change is one of them. I also think that we're seeing now, with what's going on in the country, the intersection of ecology and social justice, that we're finding out that where people live and what they're exposed to can have real ramifications on their health and their future. And as fisheries and wildlife people, how we manage the resources out there and they intersect with people's lives is going to be very, very important.
Yeah, yeah, and interestingly, climate change is really at the top of my list, I think, especially as far as future problems. And I've done now about a dozen of these interviews, and not as many said climate change as I thought they would.
Well, I think if you look at climate change as a really, really big umbrella, and it's related to land use, it's related to invasive species, we can't escape those kinds of things. But I think it's going to be the really, really serious issue that this next generation is going to have to figure out how to deal with.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So just to kind of wrap up, we talked a little bit about advice you might have or ideas you might have for, career paths and being successful and getting to where you want to be in this. But what do you have in terms of advice for a student taking FW 101 right
Be engaged, listen, and really listen hard to the stuff that you don't think you're going to be interested in. So if you're someone who says, I want to work on fish, and the lecture is going to be something that has to do with mammals, yeah, okay, I don't want to be a mammal person. No, listen to that one. Get engaged. Talk to people. If you have questions, do not be shy. If there's something that interests you, get together with Dr. Urquhart and say, can we set up a Zoom? I want to talk to you about this.
now?
Don't be shy. And one of these days, when we are all back face to face, the other professors that you're hearing from, don't be shy about coming to talk to them. Hey, I saw you on the 101 little blurb thing there, and you were talking about moose. I want to know about moose. Don't be shy.
Yeah, I definitely echo that if you can find a way to get to interact with the professors and graduate students and other people around MSU, you really can make a lot out of your education here. So, well, thank you, Scott, for your time today. And is that an Upper Peninsula moose, or is that a moose from somewhere else?
That is a UP moose.
Wow.
I was lucky enough to study our UP moose for about 9 years. And I didn't take that particular picture, but one of our co-PIs, co-investigators on it, and that's a UP moose.
Wow, great. Yeah, I saw one once in the UP crossing the road, and it was so huge that I stopped about 100 yards from it, thinking I was getting very close, and then realized that I was still a long way from it. So, well, thank you very much, and have a good rest of your summer.
You too. And which is Nicaragua in your background? Where is?
That is the Ecuadorian Amazon.
Ah,
So
okay.
a hilltop in Ecuador, which is kind of rare in the Amazon to find hilltops. So nice, beautiful place to go. So thank you very much, and look forward to seeing you in person in the fall again.
Yeah, good luck to your class. Appreciate
you.
it. Thanks.